Hello again, my name's Dee Campbell and welcome to another one of my videos. Today's video is going to be about obesity and overweight coding in 2026. There's been quite a few different guideline changes with it. This is kind of a fun one that I wanted to do some more absurd things with, because I know a lot of people have a hard time with this concept, and I really want to cement this concept in everyone's head. And honestly, in my opinion, sometimes absurdity is the best way to get it through to people. So let's explain obesity and overweight coding. Obesity and overweight coding had quite a few different guideline changes in the 2025 guideline, where now it has its own separate section. In chapter 4.b, you will find this obesity information. The first guideline isn't that important, that it's kind of always existed. It just more explains it now that the E86 codes also have codes that are related to the cause of it. So as we know, there's drug-induced codes, there's obesity due to excessive calories, and all of those codes exist, as we always known. 4B.1, however, is a newer guideline because the obesity class codes are newer codes. Obesity class code seems to be the direction that ICD-10 is guiding people to work for, but note there's a few guidelines with obesity class. One, obesity class should be documented in the medical record by the provider for these codes to be assigned. So that means just because a provider documents a patient has 36 BMI and they are obese, doesn't mean that you can assume the class code. The provider themselves must actually report the class codes to be used. And then it is also important to note that however class 3 obesity and morbid obesity are documented together, you may only code class 3 obesity as it is considered more specific. Personally, I kind of hate that guideline, and I'll expand more on it later, but that's how it works. Just remember, you can report the class codes with more specific class codes, except class 3 with specifically morbid obesity. And then Z68 as a guideline I want to break down here. These are the Z68 BMI guidelines that we have. BMI codes should only be assigned when there is an associated reportable diagnosis documented by the patient's provider. So what that means is the provider themselves must document in each and every visit if there is an actual reportable reason to use the BMI code for that reason that it can be reported. How coding works is coders can always assign BMI codes regardless of the information. Just because BMI fluctuates so frequently when you're in that BMI period of 25 BMI to 39 BMI, each percentage point is its own separate code. So it's too much work for a provider to be expected to always do those updated BMI codes. Because of that, coders can always assign the BMI codes when it's appropriate. And it is only appropriate when the provider documents a specific reason for the BMI code to be used. For example, obesity class 3. We'll get a little more further into this as we expand on it, but just note, if you as a provider are only documenting BMI of 50, everyone has to just kind of play dumb in those situations. We can never assign BMI codes when it comes to pregnancy. Instead, you will just use this obesity complicating pregnancy codes up here. Because obviously BMI is expected to change throughout pregnancy, there is the carve out that we can never use it. And then when documentation shows a fluctuation of BMI values throughout the current visit, more for an inpatient setting, you must report the most severe value. So let's say a patient was at let's say BMI of 41, so they're technically at class 3, but then by the end they drop down to 39, you would still use class 3, because that is what they were at the highest level during their care. Obesity and comorbidities, and why I don't like the morbid obesity guideline changes. Morbid obesity had a lot of nuances before when it came to healthcare, where morbid obesity could also be assigned in the case of a patient with only a 35 BMI, as long as they have at least one of the weight-related comorbidities that you see over here. So we really lost a lot of nuances in reporting when it came to medical coding. It's really kind of stinky, honestly, that we lost morbid obesity to be reported with class 3. And frankly, to say that class 3 is more specific just kind of seems asinine to me. Class 3 just purely states that their BMI is greater than 40. It doesn't even let me know whether or not the person has a comorbidity. So personally, I think the morbid obesity codes are better. However, we must follow coding guidelines. We still have that nuance, however, though, for class 2 can still be reported with morbid obesity at least. So if you have a class 2 patient with, let's say, obstructive sleep apnea, you can still report morbid obesity as long as the provider documents that it's morbid obesity and the OSA is caused by the patient obesity. Then and only then can we report it. So this is just kind of coding that has been changed. Honestly, it seems like it's more for the sensitivity side of things are changing. Truly, I think they should have just chopped off this excess calorie phrasing. I think that was the offensive part of the codes. But also, I'm a firm believer of healthcare. Should also care about healthcare, and we shouldn't really care about offending people. As someone who used to be 235 pounds at my max, I appreciated my provider informing me how I could lose weight and how it was important for me to lose weight. But just wanted to point out these codes, how it works for it. We will be utilizing these codes whenever an obesity or overweight code at E66 is reported. You must always report it with the proper BMI code followed up with it. And that's how these codes work. So let's look at it from an insurance standpoint and how this will break down. What happens if the documentation is only BMI? Insurance gets to play dumb. And quite frankly, if insurance gets to play dumb, they will, every single time. So we will code the Z68 BMI code because of documentation. BMI code should only be assigned when there's associated reportable diagnosis such as obesity or anorexia documented by the patient's provider. So let's say we don't. We have two different documentation charts here and how insurance is going to see it. Patient presents with a BMI of 60 for weight management. All coders can report is the Z71.3 to make that BMI code justified, dietary counseling and surveillance, and then Z68.44, patient with a BMI of 60 to 60.99. Well, on the other hand, if your documentation read, patient presents for weight management assisted with GLP-1s, patient has class 3 obesity with a current BMI of 41. Then we can code as the first listed E66.813, the obesity, Z68.41, the BMI code, and then Z79.85 for GLP-1s. So basically what happens here is we can look at two different visits that are going to be paid quite a bit different. Even though this visit is at a 60 BMI, it should be obvious as you would assume, but sadly coders cannot assume, billers cannot assume, insurance cannot assume. Only you as the provider can actually assign obesity diagnosis. So what will happen is when we report it this way, insurance just gets to act like this is their patient that we're seeing. It's just a big muscle-bound man who's in the visit here getting their visit. If insurance gets to play dumb, they're going to play dumb each and every time. So just make certain you report things properly, and then insurance will actually see the story in the way it was meant to be told, and now you will get paid for it. So even though this patient has dramatically less BMI, since this documentation is so much more superior, we are able to get payment for it. So just remember that is how things are assumed. I decided to go with instead this kind of dress up instead of a button up because I just want you to think of me stupidly flexing here each and every time when you do these visits. I myself am just shy of 5'11". I currently weigh 198 pounds. So I'm right on that cusp of overweight and obese class 1 if you put me purely on a BMI scale. As we all know, BMI is kind of hogwash information where it can fluctuate based off someone's muscular status. So sadly, how things work is we'll always assume you just got a beef house in the clinic if you're only reporting BMI codes. It's the dumbest guideline possible. Coders can assume everyone's right-handed, but we can't assume why a provider used BMI of 60. It makes no sense, but it gives insurance a reason to deny it. So as a provider, make certain you always report to the highest level. So just to keep this absurd concept going and make certain everyone understands this, I want you to think about it as me a 198-pound man who would currently be obese class 1 doing a handstand. Obviously, I don't meet the standard of obese class 1. I am capable of doing a handstand, and I'm pretty muscular, I guess. So just remember that. Think about it that way. If you reported me as obese class 1, it'd be kind of silly. I just work out a ridiculous amount because I've gotten into it from healthcare, and that's why I weigh maybe technically an unhealthy amount on a pure BMI scale. If you look at the Mountain from Game of Thrones right here, or Dr. Mike here, each of them on a BMI scale are going to be in that like 40 to maybe even 50 range. I don't know how high the Mountain is. He may even be up to 60 BMI. Obviously, we know that these patients aren't obese. They are muscular individuals. So this is how insurance is going to see it. So just remember that. Every single time you're doing these visits, make certain you report it to the highest level possible. And finally, I just wanted to wrap up with a simple plug for a very great YouTuber who does fantastic fitness videos. Caroline Gervain. Everyone's always looking for people to recommend for helping patients lose weight. Honestly, this is how I went from 235 pounds to where I'm at right now. I've been working out with her for about 4 years now. I love her videos, love her content. There's only an ad at the very start. So honestly, I would highly recommend her videos to your patients. At-home workouts are just a great way to lose weight. Personally, for me, when I was overweight, I really had a hard time going to the gym at the start because there really is that embarrassment to it. I love Caroline. Been working out with her for 4 years now. Highly recommend you recommend her to your patients. My name's Dee Campbell, and this is my video on obesity and overweight. I know it's a little more silly and absurd, but honestly, it's kind of a silly and absurd concept with how insurance and coding treats it. So, kind of wanted to take it the same way too. So just remember, whenever you report only a BMI code, insurance is going to play dumb and treat that patient like this each and every time and say there's no medical necessity. Well, on the other hand, if you clearly document the obesity, then the insurance will have to accept the actual story happening, and then you will get paid for your work. My name's Dee Campbell. This has been Overweight and Obesity Coding. Have a wonderful day.